Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
At Consumer Cellular, you get the same exact coverage as the largest carriers, but for up to half the cost. Same thing, up to half the cost. Up to half the cost for the same thing. 50% the money for 100% the same thing. I hope I'm making myself clear. Consumer Cellular. When freedom calls, we're here to answer. Call us at 1-888-FREEDOM.
Half the cost savings based on cost of Consumer Cellular single-line 5GB data plan with unlimited talk and text compared to lowest cost single-line postpaid unlimited talk, text, and data plan offered by T-Mobile and Verizon May 2023.
This episode of The Price of Football is brought to you by Football 360. Football 360 is designed to make quality football business education accessible to any person in the world, creating opportunities for people to get access to the industry, grow professionally, or extend their knowledge of the football business.
Membership includes monthly webinars with me, and then proper industry experts, as well as networking sessions. And the course itself features 11 hours of content broken into 15-minute on-demand video lessons with yours truly. It covers everything related to football finance, including club financial statements, player trading, club valuation, financial fair play, and even amortization.
Ooh, so go to football360.online to sign up now and get access to a wealth of resources for the extremely accessible price of £149. That's football360.online. Hello and welcome to The Price of Football, the show that looks at the money behind the beautiful game with me, Kevin Day, and Liverpool University's Kieran Maguire. Kieran, how are you? It's lovely to see you in person on Thursday night in the city of London at Palace 2. It's very pleasant, and I got your bottle of wine, which was lovely.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it was really good to meet up in flesh and to I did a little bit of recording in your shed on another project. And the thing I want to know, Kevin, is what is Stuart Lee's gardening gloves doing in your office?
Well, first of all, I should point out to people that doing a bit of recording in my shed is not a euphemism. And for the love of God, don't let Ali hear you call it a shed. It's a workroom, office space, studio, Kieran. It's not. I don't know what Stuart Lee's gardening gloves are doing in my shed, workspace, office room, studio, etc. I can't imagine that Stuart Lee is given to gardening. Ali looks after him, produces his shows. So I assume there was some kind of 35-minute routine about gardening gloves in a postmodern ironic style that he did at some stage. I shall look into it, as I promised to do when you came across them on Thursday and were very excited, and then completely forgot, mainly because I had your bottle of wine that evening, as well as many other people's. And don't tell the Baroness, because I think the debate was when the organisers said, "Oh, we've got Kieran a bottle of wine, he doesn't drink." They went, "Oh, perhaps he can take it home for his wife." Yeah, perhaps. It's questions day, Kieran. My first question is, why are Palace fans suddenly experts in the pub afterwards? All 190 people in the pub saying, "Yeah, told you Rory Hodgson was the right person for the job." Liars. But we do have two news stories, Kieran, beforehand. Well, three, if you include the fact that Leicester are arguably the worst team I've seen in the Premier League for a long time. But Premier League clubs, Kieran, look like, and this is something you've predicted for a while, that they are finally going to do a voluntary ban on front of shirt gambling sponsorship.
Yes, there was a meeting of chief executives of the Premier League. I think it was last Thursday. And some of the noises that leaked out, and people do talk to journalists, and journalists do talk to people in the world of football, is that there is going to be a voluntary ban on front of shirt deals. Now, I think this is going to be sort of graduated. So if you have an existing contract with a gambling company, that can roll on. I think we will probably be looking at 25, 26 before it does come in. But then you start to look at the detail. And speaking to some commercial directors, they said, this isn't good news for our club because it tends to be, and in fact it is the case, that the big six clubs don't have front of shirt deals with gambling companies because they've got more global sponsors. And in terms of what is available in respect of the money, the gambling companies have the biggest wallets because they are the biggest beneficiaries. They've made more money from football than anybody else since the Premier League started in 1992. So the smaller clubs are probably going to be the ones that take the hit. But then you say, well, is it going to be anything else happening? And they said, no, because the shirt sleeve deals can have gambling sponsors on. So, yeah, that seems to make no sense whatsoever. And it looks like the value of the shirt sleeve deals will therefore go up and the value of the front of shirt deals will go down. And we will still have perimeter advertising for gambling companies. We will still have gambling advertising on television. And the gambling industry says, well, we've got the whistle-to-whistle ban. And then you start to, again, dig deep. And as soon as you get beyond the headlines, you say, well, actually, this is so superficial. This is a lot of tokenism. The whistle-to-whistle ban means that there's no advertising for gambling companies at halftime, but the show can be sponsored by a gambling company. We've even got adverts for gambling during matches on commercial radio. So it's not addressing the broader issues in relation to the relationship between the gambling industry and football. And the gambling industry does very well out of football, and the football does very well out of the gambling industry. So people say, well, who are the losers here? Well, we're talking about individuals, and we're talking about families of individuals, and we're talking about friends and loved ones of individuals. And this, I do have a bee in my bonnet about this because we've worked with Gambling with Lives. We've worked and spoken to people with from the Big Step. I've attended a meeting at the House of Commons in respect of families who had lost people to gambling, and it's horrible, and not enough is being done because you see the fines which are being given to the gambling companies, and I know we spoke about this last week. The fines are just seen as occupational hazards by the industry.
Yeah. Interesting though, Kieran, that not long after we started the pod, the government indicated that they would probably be looking at making a ban on gambling sponsorship legal, or bringing into law a ban on gambling sponsorship. And then they rode back a little and said that they would ask the clubs to look at a voluntary ban, at which point everybody said, well, it's not going to happen then. And yes, it has. I mean, this has come as somewhat as a surprise, hasn't it, really, Kieran? Is there a moral element here? Is it timing? Is it another of those attempts to show the people that have introduced the white paper that the Premier League can regulate its own affairs?
I think you just nail on head. The timing is no great surprise. And also a further issue that arose in the meeting on Thursday is that there's going to be a beefed up owners and directors test applying. And again, the Premier League said, look, self-regulation, we can do it. But would this have happened had it not been for the white paper? I'm not so certain. And there does appear to be some form of moral / ethical clause being brought into the enhanced owners and directors test. And let's be honest, anything which makes things a little bit tougher has got to be welcomed. But it will effectively probably stop Kim Jong-il buying a Premier League football club and the Taliban, and that's about it. So as soon as you go beneath the surface of the headlines, any country which has good trading relations with the UK, and I'm not saying that investors from the Middle East or from the Far East or anywhere should be banned from investing in the football industry. I'm actually pretty relaxed about it. I'm more concerned about people with an individual nefarious background. But it's all part of the charm campaign that we're getting from the Premier League at present, and that's the issue which makes me feel quite uneasy.
I think one of those people you mentioned is dead, and one is probably quite opposed to sport in the first place. So
Yes.
it'd be highly unlikely if either of them are making a bid for Palace or any other football club in the near future. But apologies, Kieran, if it took me quite a while to get through that previous sentence I mentioned. That's because I didn't leave the pub until about 10:15 last night, celebrating the fact that it took us 95 minutes to beat the worst team I've seen in the Premier League this season. Another news story, Kieran, and I always like a news story that has the words secret and bankroll in it. And it comes as no surprise to learn who the person who may have been secretly bankrolling someone was.
Yes, and hats off to the Guardian, and I think it's the Bureau of Investigative Journalists who have done some sterling work, not just in the world of football, but this is something called the Oligarch Files. So therefore, it will come as no great surprise. Name your favourite oligarch.
It just sounds like a 70s sitcom.
It
No,
does.
it's the Oligarch Files.
It's Roman Abramovich. And it's all to do with the team called Vitesse Arnhem, who were taken over in 2010 by a guy called Merab Jordania, who was a former Georgian footballer. So far, so good. Vitesse Arnhem just happened to be a sort of a partner club to Chelsea. So Nemanja Matic went there when he first arrived at Chelsea. I believe Mason Mount has spent some time there. And look, there's nothing wrong with this, but it comes down to transparency and being upfront, because under UEFA rules, one person cannot have control or influence over more than one club. Now, there's been 2 investigations by KNVB, the Dutch Football Authority, and on both occasions they said, well, we've taken a look. I won't do my Steve McLaren accent here. We've taken a look, and we're quite happy that there's no sign of any relationship. And I understand where they're coming from, and certainly, in my experience of finance, the best thing to do is to follow the money if you can, and following money can be very difficult. So it looks as if Vitesse Arnhem have had loans of around about £103 million, and this has come from a company effectively controlled by Roman Abramovich in that paragon of transparency, the British Virgin Islands, which then lent money to another company based in Liechtenstein, which was then connected to another company based in Belize. And you go, blimey, that seems, why not just go and ping them a few quid using an app? It's a lot easier to do this. So, and Vitesse Arnhem, £103 million of loans for a club which generates income of £12 million a year seems pretty generous. So, is this linked to Mr. Abramovich? Again, we can't say for certain, but there do appear to be questions which we would like answered. And knowing Mr. Abramovich, the one thing you won't get him to do is to answer any questions. But it's further indication that there is not full transparency in football, and whatever the regulatory body, be it the FA, the Premier League, the EFL, FIFA, UEFA, whoever it's going to be involved, do have a huge job on their hands. And this would be the same if an independent regulator is appointed. They might have slightly more statutory powers, but if anybody thinks that all of football's problems are going to go away with the regulator, I think that's a very wishful and foolhardy approach to take.
Do you think we should ask producer Guy to get a hold of Roman Abramovich and maybe threaten to go on strike and say there's no pod until we've interviewed Abramovich? Because he's full of himself that he got hold of the director of Llandudno FC. So let's set him a really difficult task and get him Roman Abramovich. Very good interview, by the way, with Tom.
Yeah.
Llandudno FC, which has had we've had a lot of very good feedback from. So I'm glad we did that. On to our questions, Kieran. And our first question comes from Graham Joseph. And I suspect this question was probably set when the clocks went back rather than when the clocks went forward, because it's an interesting one, but it's something I think that football has been discussing. And Graham Joseph says, given the meteoric price rises for electricity recently, would there be a financial benefit for English-Scottish League games kicking off at 2 p.m. instead of 3 on a Saturday this winter, due to the floodlights having to be turned on as it's pitch black come 4:45 p.m? If those league matches finished an hour early and the floodlights weren't needed, how much would this save a league club in electricity costs? And I know certainly in Scottish football, Kieran, clubs were given the option to kick off earlier, weren't they? And it's a very sensible suggestion from Graham. That wouldn't inconvenience people that much and would presumably, as he says, save a lot of money.
Yes, I agree, Graham. On the face of things, it does have some merit. I think whenever there is a proposal for change, it is useful to have a cost-benefit analysis. And I know it sounds very nerdy in middle management speak and so on. There would be a potential cost savings, but I did speak to one or two chief executives of clubs in the lower divisions, and the response was a little bit surprising. They said, we've worked it out, but actually our fear would be that attendances would decrease. And the reason for this is that many people still do Saturday morning shifts. You know, they're working in a shop. They might own their own place, and they're open till midday or at 1 o'clock. And then they say, right, we're going to pack things up and go and watch the football. That would make it more difficult for them. There's also the issue of away fans. You know, getting to matches is a trial these days a lot of the time, especially given the challenges that we have with the transport network. Ideally, you like to get there a couple of hours early. So what do? You either go to the ground and have some catering, shall we say, or you go to a local pub and do similar. So if the matches are now kicking off an hour early, the chances of fans have to get up pretty early as is, but having to get up a further hour early, I think would be difficult. There is also, as far as children's football is concerned, that tends to take place on Saturday mornings. So there's you've got that regime of, mum and dad, parents, whoever it's going to be, they'll go and watch their son or daughter play on a Saturday morning match. That match normally kicks off at 10:30, finishes at midday, run home, change kit, shower, set off, get to the match. And if it's a 3 o'clock kickoff, it's not easy, but it can be done. You move the kickoffs forward an hour, that becomes more difficult, and then there's a decision to be made. Does the son or daughter want to play football on a Saturday morning more than they want to go to the match in the afternoon? And potentially one of either the football club's going to lose out or the kids' team's going to lose out. And I don't think that's good for football. So I absolutely understand the merits and, perhaps greater efficiency in terms of the way that we design floodlights, we use floodlights. There's a greater case for having solar power and so on. I think those are issues, but I'm not necessarily certain that moving kickoffs forward an hour is going to benefit clubs financially overall.
Ken, I'm really interested to hear that response from football club CEOs. Because every time I mention, and I suspect it's the same for you, every time I mention the sanctity of the 3 o'clock Saturday kickoff, there will be 20 people who say, what is this, 1898? Those days are long gone. And yet it seems that there are still practical reasons for kicking off at 3 o'clock on a Saturday, which I'm actually quite pleased to hear, to be honest.
Yeah, and think about your Saturday routine. It is geared towards the 3 o'clock. And it was the same yesterday. Myself and the Baroness, we have a Saturday routine which involves
Careful.
Because this is bourgeois. It's brunch. She has her eggs Benedict. I have my avocado and sourdough, and she has a bit, normally quite a bit of prosecco. I'm the designated driver who's knocking back the iced tea. But that's
Getting
and to bring that forward an hour, it's just not on, Kevin. It's just not on.
I can imagine, Kieran, that Eggs Benedict at 9:30 in the morning would probably be a tad wearisome. I get you. Smashed avocado at that time of the day. Probably your taste buds haven't quite kicked into gear, and then you're flooding them with iced tea. For my routine, it wouldn't be much of a sacrifice to get to the Parsons Arms at 10 o'clock in the morning rather than 11. If I had to do it, Kieran, I would do it, to be perfectly honest.
You're a trooper, Kevin.
Of course I am. I love my club, Kieran. It's as simple as that. Dedicated fan. Jordan Beck has our next question. And Jordan says, my question is about MLS and its structure. So the league has some absolutely Looney Tunes financial rules from several types of money designated by acronyms GAM and TAM, and you'll have to explain those, Kieran. Discovery rights on already established players, different player classifications like designated player, homegrown player. But my question is about the league's single entity structure. What are the benefits for the clubs for being a league operating this way, or are there none, and it's just the price of admission to get into the league in the first place? This is a bit I really like from Jordan. Not that Jordan's prone to hyperbole at all, but Jordan says, if this is your first foray into MLS financials, welcome to hell.
I found it heaven. So you can imagine. I like researching topics.
Financial rules, of course. I can just see you now with an iced tea in one hand, spreadsheet in the other. Obviously, you've only got two hands, so I don't know where I'm fitting in the smashed avocado. The Baroness spoon feeding you smashed avocado.
Those are the days, Kevin. Those are the days. Early in the relationship, perhaps.
On the honeymoon, maybe. Yeah.
All right, so let's take a look at the MLS, and I think the key words is the single entity structure, and by that it means that the MLS is a franchise organisation in which there is no promotion or relegation. There's also a salary cap of $4.9 million, which you're going, well, hold on, how did David Beckham play there? How are they hoping to sign Messi and so on? You've got things such as designated players, which are effectively you are allowed star players who are exempt from the overall salary cap. So there's lots of rules, and GAM stands for General Allocation Money, and TAM stands for Targeted Allocation Money. And one of the things that they like in US sports franchises is that they like to spread the trophies around. Yeah. So therefore, for those clubs who have not been in the previous season's playoffs, for those clubs who have not qualified for CONCACAF competitions and so on, they get additional funds. So it's a bit like, if Palace and Brighton, didn't qualify for Europe, they would get extra money from a different pool from the Premier League, and perhaps they'd be able to sign. They'd have first dibs if there was anything similar to a draft scheme, which of course we don't have as far as football is concerned. And the aim of this is to make sure that we don't end up with a procession, as far as trophies are concerned. And there is an element of merit to that. If you take a look at the NFL, I think there's been sort of 12 NFL champions in the last 20 years or so. Somebody would tell me the actual stats. And that's good for the sporting chance and integrity issues. So that's the issues there. Now, you then say, well, what's the purpose of sport? Now, the purpose of football in the UK, and you looked at the history of what happened here. Professional football started off in the north of England because when the legislation was changed in the Victorian era, which meant that that factories couldn't be open all day on a Saturday, and they effectively had to close at midday on a Saturday. So what were the factory workers going to do? So the factory owners said, well, we'll set up a football club and we'll take some of their salary off them by having professional football. And that worked very well. But there's always been sort of this concept of promotion and relegation. And that's one of the great things about football. American sport is aimed at benefiting the owners first and foremost. And what investors dislike most of all is risk and uncertainty.
Yeah.
And the biggest risk that exists in football is relegation. And if you think about it, if Palace were playing Leicester yesterday and there was no relegation from the Premier League, yes, it would be great. It's always great to get a 95th minute winner. No denying that. But it was the fact that it gave you 3 points after you've had a bit of a poor period of time.
Yeah.
And
that's in the past. That's gone, Kieran.
That's that. Yeah, ancient history. History.
Yeah. You've already crowbarred in twice this week the fact that Brighton are in the FA Cup semi-final, Kieran. So that's fine. I understand. But yeah,
okay.
we're flying high in the Premier League. We're unbeaten in April, Kieran. We've got 100% record in the month of April. Let's focus on that, shall we?
Would that result have meant as much to you if relegation didn't exist?
No, fair point.
And you look at some of those results yesterday. Bournemouth beating Fulham. The late goals here and there. The great thing about football is that relegation is as exciting as getting into the Champions League, as is winning the Premier League, and therefore that is something that they don't have in US sport, and something that when you talk to American sports fans, actually the fans are quite jealous of.
Yeah,
because football isn't about the joy; it's about the misery, and it's about turning misery into joy. And I think that's something that they don't necessarily have in the US. But that is because the aim of the MLS is to make money for club owners. Now, as we know, football in this country doesn't make money, but there is greater emphasis on the other stakeholders, especially the fans, in terms of the opportunities to move up and down the leagues. You can only do that in the US if you go and pay what's known as an expansion franchise fee, where it will cost you, a couple of $100 million to set up a team in a new city to join the MLS.
It's all very well for you, Kieran, being cavalier about phrases, joy, misery of relegation. You're 8th in the table. Are you?
Yes.
All right. We've already spoiled my morning by reminding me that Bournemouth won yesterday as well. So 6, are you, Mr. Lardidar, yes. Kieran Maguire?
Start your wellness journey at Whole Foods Market, where it's Jumpstart January through the 16th. Stock up on supplements with some of the year's biggest savings. Plus, save on air-chilled organic boneless skinless chicken breasts, organic Honeycrisp apples, organic large Hass avocados, and more. And since Whole Foods Market is the only certified organic national grocer, it's easy to make them your wellness destination. Jumpstart your January now at Whole Foods Market.
Our next question, Kieran, comes from Joel Sperry. And Joel's got a bee in his bonnet, as well as a bugbear and a penchant for quotation marks. Joel says, I have a question related to a bugbear of mine. You often see, and I like this, journalists, in quotation marks, ranting about young players going to other clubs for a low fee or a low amount set by a tribunal. They often use the market value, in quotation marks, as a metric, and exclaim that the fee is way below their market value, exclamation mark. What irks me is that in these cases, the players' contract has run out, so they are effectively a free transfer. Ergo, they have no market value, and this metric is erroneous. The fee scheme, as far as I know, is to compensate the club for the costs involved in developing the young player. And my question is then, how much does it cost for a club to develop that player? I like to think that Joel wrote that question at a similar time of the morning with the same sort of hangover that I've got at the moment.
Absolutely. It's not possible to allocate the overall academy costs to an individual player, or even perhaps more than one player. And the more that you look at academies, the more uncomfortable you can potentially get. I think I've said this before. I know one person who's in charge of an academy who has a budget of £6 million for FFP purposes. That's what goes into the books. And he says he's told by the club to spend just 2. So trying to get a definitive picture is a challenge. There's also the fact that there are players at academies who the scouts or the academy development managers will know effectively from day one are not going to make the grade, but are there to be opposition for the players who are going to make the grade, because you can't just have blow up dummies as opposition. So it is very tricky. If we start to look at academy costs, if you've got a Category 1 academy, then there are a number of checks and balances. There are commitments to education and player development and as an element of aftercare and so on. So that's going to cost probably between £6 and £15 million a year. Potentially that could be higher if the club has an awful lot of people at the academy. If you take a look at Manchester City, for example, their academy players have the option to go to the private school St Bede's, where fees are £12,600 a year. So, should those costs be included as part of the overall costs, or is that just a way of the club showing its commitment to developing the education of the young people coming through? And I think education is a big issue, because there has been work done in respect of player development. And one of the interesting things, which we'll be looking at EPP later, but one of the things which concerns me most of all as somebody that works in education is that if you take a look at the data, an academy player who comes into football between the ages of 9 and 11, on average, they have higher than average educational achievement.
Yeah.
But by the time they are 16, they are well below the average. So what are football academies doing? For the players that make it, it's fantastic. From the players that don't make it, they're turning young people from having above average educational attainment to mediocre. And I think that's one of the indictments of the game. And I think this is where the game lets people down. Other stakeholders in those young individuals, such as the parents, is their focus too much on, my young child is at the academy of X club, and all of our focus is going to go onto the football side of things because we want them to be the next Harry Kane, Marcus Rashford, Phil Foden, whoever it's going to be. And do we take the eye off the ball in terms of their broader education, including their financial education? There was a tragic story this week about Craig Bellamy, who's now bankrupt. Yeah, and we know from talking to people. You've known people who've been professional footballers. I speak to the PFA on a regular basis, and they are trying to do something about this. But there is a huge issue with regards to the protection of these young people, both as academies players, as young professionals, and also as senior and past professionals, that they are not being looked after by the industry. And for too many of them, there's a friend for every pound that they earn. And as soon as the pounds disappear, those friends disappear as well. So I can't give a definitive figure to Joel, but certainly as far as the Category 1 academies are concerned, probably in the region of 6 to 15 million. A Category 2 academy, you're probably looking somewhere in the region of 1.5 to 2 million.
I think in terms of Man City, Kieran, and St Bede's, you talk to people at the club, I think there is a genuine commitment to educating their young players there. I don't think there is any cynical backstory to that. But we joked earlier about getting Roman Abramovich on, which we obviously can't afford him. I don't know where you'd pay his money now. He's being sanctioned either. But Tony Pulis is somebody I would love to talk to, because he did a brilliant interview recently, because he spent a year researching the education and the finances of academies. And for somebody who's, I think old school is probably the word you use about Tony Pulis, his views were surprisingly modern and quite scathing of the way young people are coming out of academies and the way they're being treated. So it'd be, if we could get a hold of him, I'd really like to talk to Tony Pulis about that. And I would urge people listening to this to just Google the words Tony Pulis and academies, because what he has to say is fascinating, if slightly worrying, I have to say. Now, Kieran, we have two questions about stadia now. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago about the SoFi Stadium in LA, which was going to host the World Cup final, until it turned out it was only 3 yards wide, so it couldn't do that. And this question comes from Phil Chater, and it's an interesting one off the back of that, I presume. Phil says, I was recently watching a YouTube video about the American stadia to feature in the 2026 World Cup, including the MetLife Stadium in New York, the Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia, and the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami. My question is, though, as FIFA say you can't use sponsored naming rights on stadia in their tournaments, will they have to recompense the current sponsors?
I think the simple answer here is no, because it's all part of the negotiation arrangement. As we know, FIFA is a charity.
Yeah.
And so we've known that to our cost at times.
Yeah, which is why they didn't pay you for that 2 days work you did for them, Kieran.
Well, it wasn't 2 days, but yeah, it was.
Kieran, it would have been 2 days if I was claiming for it. I'd have invoiced 2 days. 8 weeks.
Terry would be proud of you.
Yeah. Gianni Infantino, 8 weeks, £2,000 a day, thank you. Which to him is perfectly reasonable money, I would imagine.
Absolutely. When FIFA is doing its inspections of those countries which are applying to host the World Cup, one of the things they'll be saying is, where are the matches going to take place? And if they say, well, we want a match to take place at the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, FIFA will simply say, well, if you want it to be called the Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, the deal's off. There's no way you're going to be allocated the tournament. Right. So you have two choices. You either find another stadium which does not have a corporate naming arrangement, or we simply say no now. And the reason for this, this is about the third time I've defended FIFA in recent weeks.
Shocking! It was noted in the Paulson's Arms yesterday, Kieran. I think the phrase lapdog was used at some stage.
Janny's lapdog, my word! How the mighty have fallen. It's me. I've gone from the Marquis Smith of the football industry to Janny's lapdog.
I think that was a full song, wasn't it? Gianni's lapdog.
Probably.
I think he sacked a drummer halfway through it. Did you know?
But FIFA is very, very hot on brand protection and sponsor protection, because if you take a look at their rules when it comes to ambush marketing, can you see from their point of view is that if they went to, let's say that they went to the Miller Lite Stadium somewhere in Texas, and of course they've got their global sponsor for alcohol is Budweiser. You've got a conflict of interest. So that is why FIFA say we will not have any sponsor names as far as the individual stadiums are concerned. Now, whether that stops the commentators on TV and radio from using the sponsor names, whether that stops the fans referring to it as the Lincoln Field or the Hard Rock, I think it's probably unlikely. But for corporate purposes, for branding purposes, it has to be the stadium in Miami, the stadium in New York. They might give the location of the stadium, but they wouldn't give the sponsor name, and therefore they would not give any compensation either. They either say you move elsewhere or you don't get awarded the tournament, and it is very much between a rock and a hard place. Do you like that one?
Yeah. Josh Stedman has a question about stadia closest to home, unless, of course, you live in America when it's the other way around. Josh is a Brentford fan, and he says Brentford announced a new stadium name last year. The Brentford Community Stadium will now be known as the G-Tech Community Stadium for 10 years. My question is, how does that all work? For example, what sort of price do you think the deal was worth? Would some type of cost reduction be offered to G-Tech if we get relegated? Does all the money go to the club to spend how they want? Or is it agreed that some will be held aside for maintenance and development of the stadium? What sort of returns or benefits would G-Tech expect from this? These are all interesting, detailed questions, Kieran, that we don't really talk about when we talk about sponsored naming deals. And also, it has to be said, I mean, it's a remarkable piece of architecture, that stadium as well. The way they've fitted it in to that little tiny corner by the river is incredible.
Yeah, and gets a good atmosphere as
absolutely,
well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, the simple answer, John, is that it's a private contract between two parties to which nobody's entitled to third-party access. Having said that, I would expect, from G-Tech's point of view, there to be step-ups and step-downs with regards to Brentford's status within the football pyramid, because they're a damn good side. The match yesterday at the Amex was a cracking game of football, and if they're in the Premier League, then they are more likely to be on television, which is going to be beamed to 188 different countries. They will be hosting Manchester United and Liverpool and Chelsea and Manchester City and so on, and Arsenal, and getting more attention than in the Championship. And no disrespect, if it's Tuesday night at home to Reading, how many people are tuning in? So I would expect from G-Tech's point of view to have agreements with regards to the division they're in. In respect of how the money is used, it could be that they might insist that some of the money is ring-fenced for academy purposes, but they're under no obligation to do so. In respect of the amounts, difficult one. My understanding, as far as sort of to give an analogy, Brighton at the Amex, Brighton are getting £100 million from Amex over, I think, a 10 or 11-year period, but that includes front of shirt. And again, that would decrease when Brighton are relegated.
Oh, don't tease me with things like that, Kieran. Don't just. I've now got my fingers permanently crossed. You've said that. I do wonder, though, for all that Brentford Stadium is fantastic, and they clearly would have got a good deal from G-Tech, I do wonder how much they've lost by not having KLM painted on the roof of their stand, which was right underneath the flight path into Heathrow. That must have been some fantastic advertising for that airline for many years, which presumably came at a cost, I would have thought, Kieran, wouldn't it?
Oh, certainly, yeah. There's no way a commercial director wouldn't be pointing out this is the number of flights which go through Heathrow.
Yeah.
This is the average number of people on a flight. This is the average wealth. This is the average income of a person flying on those flights. You are targeting ABC One customers. It'll be worth a fair amount.
Yeah. Having said that, whether you saw that advert for KLM just after you'd taken off or just before you landed, you still couldn't help thinking, it's a bit late now. I wish I'd thought about that before I booked this flight on British Airways, which is 2 days late. I've been putting off asking this next question, Kieran, because I know it's going to come with giggles, but also you're just going to. I mean, this is the perfect Kieran Maguire question, isn't it? It's the proper financial accounting question, and it's got some double entendre in it. Which
yes.
I can only suggest Ian Beresford has done deliberately, Ian, because I know what you mischievous accountants are like. I know most of you come into the accountancy for the sex. You stay for the jokes. Ian Beresford says, as an accountant myself, I like a bit of double entry. But can Kieran... Oh, so I left a pause there, Kieran. You didn't giggle. Is that...
I was trying my hardest.
Let's go back to the start so I can say it again. As an accountant myself, I like a bit of double entry. But can Kieran help with what happens in a leveraged buyout situation? I know the debt ends up on the balance sheet, but where does the other entry go? Is it a share premium, goodwill, or something else? The cash is paid to the previous shareholders, so it can't be that. Kieran, I'm afraid you will have to explain what double entry is for those of us who don't know the accounting version of it anyway.
For people that are not familiar with double entry, all that it is that if you think about any financial transaction, it has two impacts. So if you let's say you buy a new computer, you've got more computer, which is one asset, and you've got less cash, which is another. Or you could buy it on credit, in which case you've got more computer, you've got more laptop, and you owe money. So your asset goes up or your liability goes up. Or thirdly, you could buy it via issuing shares and swapping the shares for the laptop if it was perhaps belonging to somebody else, and you've got more asset and more equity. So it's simply the fact that under the accounting rules, balance sheets always balance. That impressed Finley, who's wandered in with a wonky chomp, which I now have to. Which the trouble is, he now likes me to play with his wonky chomp, and that is not a euphemism.
It is now.
It is. So I'm now having footsie with a dog. Hold it. The Baroness is coming to the rescue now. The Baroness is playing footsie with my dog.
Okay, try not to say double entry while the Baroness is here, Kieran.
Yeah, certainly not. Certainly not. Not the number of years into our relationship.
I don't know. I don't know if I'm proud or ashamed, Kieran, to think this is the only podcast in the world where someone's wife is playing footsie with a dog under the table and a wonky chomp while we discuss double entry on what is ostensibly meant to be a serious football finance pod, Kieran. We have the ear of MPs. You took part in the fan-led review, Kieran. You have the phone number of every chief executive of every football club basically in the world. And here we are doing childish double entendre about double entry while your wife tickles a dog's feet under the table. It's just, this is why we're not winning prizes, Kieran. It's simple as that.
It's also why we've still got listeners.
Possibly for the well, maybe we don't know that for certain, Kieran. To be perfectly honest, and wait till we get to our next question about football in Kazakhstan. That'll challenge them even more. Carry on.
Right, but back to Ian's question. What happens normally is that when there is this thing called a leverage buyout, and a leverage buyout where effectively a company is created to take over a football club, and that company borrows money. But the thing to note is that there is normally a newco, a new creation. And in the case of probably the most famous leverage buyout, which is Manchester United, a new company was created called Red Football. Red Football borrowed money from banks, and it used that money to buy the shares of Manchester United. So therefore, on the one side of things, it had an investment in shares, and on the other side of things, it had the liability, which was the money which is owed to the bank. So that's how it is done from a double entry point of view.
Now that's interesting, Kieran. All the discussions we've ever had about Man United and the leveraged buyout, I was not aware that it was a new company that was set up to do it. So that's always the case, is it, in a leveraged buyout?
You'd really have to do that, yes, because there has to be an entity which is borrowing the money, and the old company can't borrow the money because it's not yet owned by the new shareholders. So yeah, it is a complicated issue. And if you take a look at Manchester United's annual report, you will see that there's probably about 25 to 30 companies involved with names such as Red Football Shareholder, Red Football Joint Venture, and so on. And again, it makes life more challenging. It certainly makes life more boring, which is the reason why it's only people like me that do it.
So it's taken on trust then that if you're lending the millions, billions necessary to buy Manchester United to the Glazers, even though it's a new company, you will go, well, it's the Glazers, so they will be able to pay it back. So there's no risk. There's no sort of doubt or confusion about whether this new company could pay those loans back.
No, there is a risk because the new company has to generate the cash from the running of Manchester United, which would then allow it to meet the instalment payments. And in the case of Manchester United, Manchester United is a cash cow. If you take a look at the early years of the ownership of the Glazers, Manchester United in some years was paying more than £100 million a year in interest, because the markets lend. They ask themselves sort of two or three questions. A, do we have the money to lend? B, does the borrowing party have the ability to repay? And they weren't certain. So I think they were charging 1.14.25% on some of the loans, right. which is a crazy rate for 2005 investment. But they will do an assessment of management in terms of, do we think that the new managers, the new people in charge of the company, do they have the ability to continue to generate the cash to allow the business to repay?
Right, okay. So Finlay, is that Finlay going, or the Baroness coming back in?
That was Finlay going.
Okay. Now, some of you listening to this may be thinking, we know what that Kevin's like. He likes a little joke, indicating that the next question is about football in Kazakhstan, as an example of a boring accountancy question that's coming up. No, the next question is about football in Kazakhstan, Kieran, and it comes from Ossian Worth. I hope I pronounced that Ossian. I think that is it a Welsh name, I believe, Ossian. Ossian says, what are the finances like in Kazakh football, specifically for my club Shakhtar Karaganda? How much does it cost? That sounds like a bit like a Harry Potter spell, doesn't it? Shakhtar Karaganda. How much does it cost to run a football club here? And is there any potential for clubs to actually make money? For example, if they manage to qualify for a European competition group stage. And one more question, if I may. Yes, of course you may, Ossian. Can you find out approximately how much a footballer can expect to earn here in Kazakhstan?
Well, I thought this could be. Yeah, we've always been saying, Kevin, that there's going to be a question where we're going to admit defeat.
Yep.
And I was about to admit defeat, but I am indebted. I am indebted to my very good friend, Ruslan Nazibov. And Ruslan is the chief executive of Tufan FC in Azerbaijan.
Right.
And it just so happens that I'm presently teaching Ruslan because he is a student at the University of Liverpool. He's doing our football MBA course at present, and he's a fascinating guy. And I'm hoping to fly over to Azerbaijan and do a bit of teaching there, because it's one of those places I've never visited, and I love to get the opportunity to go to new places. So, yeah, Ruslan knows the Kazakhstan position quite well. And he said, as far as clubs' finances are concerned, all the clubs tend to lose money. They will only break even if they get into either the Champions League or the Europa League. If they get to the Europa Conference, again, probably still losing money.
Right. Okay.
And what they have to do is that they have to rely on player trading. To develop good players with ideally, moving them on and making some money elsewhere. But it is a real challenge. Now, as far as the finances are concerned in Azerbaijan, on average, players are probably on $4,000 to $5,000 a month. So that's sort of £800 to £1,000 a month. A week, which is good. Good, reasonable money. The top players in Azerbaijan, he estimates, probably on $20,000 to $30,000 per month. The highest paid player is the Croatian winger Marin Tomasov, who plays for the champions Astana, and he's estimated to be on $65,000 a month. So that's about $750,000, probably about £600,000 a year.
Right.
So it's a decent amount of income. It's not comparable with the big leagues in Europe, but it still shows that football is a aspirational career in countries beyond the sort of the major countries, in terms of the ones that regularly get to the latter stages of European football.
Yeah, and is there an equivalence though, Kieran, between Azerbaijan and Kazakhstan? Because Azerbaijan is gas rich, isn't it? So are they more? Do you think the similar rates would apply in Kazakh football?
Yes. I mean, this is Ruslan's. Because they share sort of common language and dialect. He knows an awful lot about Kazakhstan football. So those are the figures he was giving me for Kazakhstan.
Right. Okay. Great. Tim Fitzgerald has our pre-penultimate question, and Tim's saying, I was wondering, says Tim, when the next EPPP is due to be renewed, and given that the EFL are the ones who have the young talent that the Premier League want, is there not an opportunity for them to drive a better bargain next time round, and how far can they push it? Might be worth explaining, Kieran, for new listeners what EPPP stands for.
Yeah, EPPP stands for the Elite Player Performance Plan, and following England's 4-1 defeat to Germany in the 2010 World Cup, there was a lot of soul searching and navel glazing by people in the football industry about we're a bit rubbish, aren't we? Even though if that Frank Lampard shot, which did go over the line, that would have made it 2-2. And who knows? But the Elite Player Performance Plan was introduced by the FA, but it was very much shaped by the Premier League. And the way that it works is that there used to be a rule in football which meant that you could not recruit young players into your youth academy if they lived more than 90 minutes from the training facilities, and this was to protect these young people. But that was then abolished, and what we now have is different categories of academy, and we were talking about this earlier in terms of the cost of developing players. The aim of EPPP is to produce more homegrown talent, although we did see Gareth Southgate, the England manager, saying only 10 days ago that he was concerned that the proportion of English qualified players in the Premier League had dropped as low as 28%, despite Brexit, despite EPP itself. The supporters of EPPP will say, well, hold on, overall, we seem to be getting more English qualified players into the game, although they might be at a lower level. There are commitments to provide funding, so that there is a 4% transfer levy, which goes into a professional game youth fund, which is there to help the clubs develop. In terms of the relationship with the EFL, the Premier League voluntarily initially gave things called solidarity payments, which said we will give a proportion of our TV deals to clubs in the EFL. And because of the success of the Premier League TV deals, the clubs in the EFL get more money from the Premier League than they do from their own TV deal. And then I think it was around about 2012, 2013, clubs in the EFL weren't particularly keen on EPPP because it would allow effectively at 24 hours notice for a Premier League club to come in. I would go and film Finlay opening and closing doors because people don't believe it's true. No, it's rather him opening doors. If only he'd learned to close them. The Premier League said, we want EPPP and we will offer you a fixed compensation tariff. And for example, let's say that you are Morecambe or Accrington, and you've got a really good, talented young person in your academy. Manchester United or Chelsea or Arsenal or Brighton or Palace, they can come along and they can say, we want this child to join our academy, and that's it. And then the next day, so you've put 2 or 3 years, you put 4 or 5 years into developing that young person in terms of their footballing ability, and they disappear. Now, there is compensation given when the player breaks into the first team. But let's say that you take the next Marcus Rashford or Harry Kane or Phil Foden from Accrington's academy. They play 100 games in the Premier League, and they're pretty good. You get £1.3 million in compensation, and you think you're probably worth a bit more than that. So that's the issue as far as clubs in the EFL are concerned. Some have therefore closed down their academies because they say, what's the point? If we do get anybody good, then they just get snaffled by somebody else. And A, we get very little compensation, and B, it takes a long time for that compensation to come through. So I think that's the position where the EFL clubs have the opportunity to develop a strike a harder bargain. I don't think they'll be able to do that because the Premier League did threaten to cancel solidarity payments unless clubs in the EFL agreed to the terms of EPPP. And the problem is that once they'd initially had this additional money, that flowed through into their wage budgets, and they don't want those wage budgets and transfer budgets to go down. So I still think the Premier League has the stronger hand. And there's lots of good things about EPPP, but the downside of it is that the levels of compensation to the development clubs are inadequate. It's not like Germany as well. The DFB, which is the governing body of German football, it has, I think, 250 regional centres, which are not necessarily affiliated to clubs in terms of player development. So it certainly has some merits, and anything which helps education. We've already spoken about the education of children, and that's what we are referring to. That they are not commodities, they are not assets, they are not part of a player trading model in order to make money for clubs. They are children, and therefore they deserve protection. I think that is potentially some of the good bits, but the downside is that it is effectively a scheme which, rightly or wrongly, has allowed the bigger clubs to get the better talent for less money.
Yeah, as the late and very, very great Barry Cryer once said to me, navel gazing is like train spotting, but for ships. Then he also added, that doesn't work written down. Our final two questions, Kieran, are about women's football. So I'm actually going to put them both to you together, if I don't mind, because
sure.
It makes sense to answer them both at the same time. The first one is from Kurt Stevens, and Kurt Stevens says, how does the financing of women's football in England actually work? As in, what percentage of funds come from commercial activities, ticket revenue, TV deals, subsidies from men's sport? And Samuel Wide says, I support Bristol Rovers women, who at the time of writing play in the 6th tier of English football. I was wondering, says Samuel, if I suddenly came into a fortune, how much would I have to spend to get the Gas Girls to the top flight of women's football?
Right. If we take a look at the top tier of English women's football, the WSL, the clubs there will make, at the very highest level, around about £5 million. Some of the clubs will make little more than 1 million. And if we take the accounts of Manchester United women's team, because I think they are currently top of the WSL, their total income last year was 5 million, of which 80% comes from the commercial arena. They only made, I think it was £377,000 from ticket sales. So, that's not a lot. And this is the big challenge for the women's game. The average price to see a WSL game is £8, and that's great, because it does attract people to come along and watch. But in order for clubs to break even, we've got tuned in the men's game to paying £30 for a ticket in the Premier League. You've got £30 being charged by some clubs in the Championship. Yet there's a case for saying, perhaps a fair price would be in the region of 18 to 20. How does the women's game persuade fans who have become familiar with buying tickets at relatively low prices to pay a fair amount more on a proportionate basis? So trying to generate more money as far as the women's professional game is concerned is a challenge in terms of ticket sales. Commercially, I think there's certainly a case for the women's teams to be looking for independent sponsors to the men's team, because I think they're targeting potentially different demographics. It gives them a slightly different identity, and so on. But talk to the commercial directors to say, well, yeah, that's one more thing that we have to do on top of what's already a fairly challenging inbox that we all have. In the case of Samuel's question, if he does win the lottery, inherit money, comes up with an amazing product and becomes a rich individual, how much will it cost? I have spoken to some of the people in the women's game with regards to this, and the answer was it's actually going to be quite challenging, because we are seeing more and more big clubs from the top two divisions start to develop their women's team, which is effectively at the grassroots.
Yeah.
And moving through this, you'd have to be looking at player development, a training environment, support off the pitch as well. So do they have training facilities? Where are they going to play? That's going to be a challenge. It doesn't have to be a huge price tag, but just effectiveness. Just effective enough to first of all attract and then retain players. Now, in the case of Bristol, there's only two. Bristol's a big city, and there's only realistically going to be two teams fighting over the talent. Bristol City and Bristol Rovers. The Southwest is underrepresented as far as women's football is concerned. So I think there are certainly opportunities. As far as women's football is concerned, going from Tier 3 to Tier 2, and then the big step from Tier 2, which is effectively semi-amateur or semi-pro, to Tier 1, which would be the professional game, that's where the costs start to rise. And this is where the investment would be required. So it's difficult to put a number on it, but I was talking to somebody who has involved in the WSL Championship, and they say, well, our total wage budget for the year is around about 250 grand. So it doesn't have to be, 250 grand is a huge amount of money to me, but it's not going to be as huge as in the men's game. And also, if we take a look at the case of Manchester United, that's a football club which didn't exist 4 years ago, and it's now top of the WSL. So it's probably going to be a bit less money than you think, Samuel. So keep working in your shed on that amazing product, and you too can be part of the WSL in 4 or 5 years.
Speaking of which, I must ask Ali what those gloves were doing in our shed, office, workroom. We might have, in the opposite corner of the country, Kieran, to Bristol, we might have a real-life example, because PIF, the owners of Newcastle United, have said they will invest into their women's team, who I think currently are in the second tier or the third tier women's football. So over the next season or two, we might find out exactly how much it takes or is necessary to get a women's team into the top flight of women's football. Thank you for that question, Samuel. Thank you for all our questions. Thank you to all our patrons. If you'd like to make a small monthly contribution to arguably the world's least professional football finance pod, go to patreon.com/priceoffootball. If you have a question you'd like answered on the show, email us at questions@priceoffootball.com. And in the meantime, I shall hand you over to Mr. Kieran Maguire for his customary farewell.
Well, as always, thank you to everybody who's supporting us at Patreon. It's absolutely fantastic. We know that times are challenging and tough for everybody, and it's very, very kind. Also to everybody for interacting. And there's some people who are showing photographs of their Price of Football shirts all over the world. We saw one from Kyoto, which was absolutely amazing. But there's another way in which you can support the show. And that's to go on to your app through which you download the Price of Football and your other podcasts, of course, and give us a review. It doesn't matter what you say on the review; it's the fact that there is one, and you can write whatever you want. You could even say, we have a bit more professionalism brought in here. You could even say you could have it presented by John Steed from the Avengers. And The Edge from U2. That would be a pretty surreal show, that.
That would be very surreal. One of them being fictional and dead.
Yes.
and the other being a musician. I was about to be scathing about musicians then, Kieran, but that would be fair. That was the coolest programme ever, wasn't it? The Avengers.
It was.
John Steed and Emma Peel. Wow. I'm off to ask Ali about the gloves, but I'll think about John Steed after that. Bye, everybody.
Bye.
The price of football. The price of football.